Alright guys, we're back with our heat treated blade. Now we have to clean this all up. We're going to thin it out and then we'll slap some handles on it. It's getting closer. Now, first thing we're going to do, and this really depends. I know some guys do it one way or another way. We're going to clean up the flats first. So we're either going to run it on the belt like this when we had the magnet on it, and just let it run on the belt, which will get it pretty flat, and just fingers crossed you get a nice finish, because it's tough getting a good finish like that. Or if your machine isn't big enough to fit a blade vertical like that, flat, we're gonna have to hand sand it, and for that we're just gonna use a good old-fashioned elbow grease, a sanding block, and some sandpaper. So I'll do some of it one way and I'll show you again the other way. Alright, but either way, whatever's easier for you. You want to keep the blades nice and cool. You don't want it overheating. See how fast it takes that color off. You just want to do enough until you have an even scratch pattern. I have a little bit left right there, and then we're good to go. A little bit closer, just a tiny bit right there on the edge. Make sure you dip it in water frequently. I can't stress that enough. Do not overheat the blade. Okay, we're going to call that side good. It's got a tiny little spot right here, but that's no big deal. We're going to hand sand it. Okay, here's my hand sanding setup. I have a block of wood in the vise and just clamp the blade to the wood, just like that, with one of these big C-clamps. You know what we're going to do is for a sanding block, I just use a piece of G10. That's all. Just anything flat. There's really no give in this at all, so it's not like a piece of wood where it's going to warp or maybe get soft on you if you get it soaking wet. And G10 will resist all the oil and Windex and other kind of lubricants we're going to use for hand sanding. So this was originally a handle scale and I screwed it up, so now it's my sanding block. Now for sandpaper, we stopped at a 220 grit finish on the grinder. You might be doing this right out of the heat treat. Either way, I start with 120 grit. Okay, this is Rhino Wet Redline. Excellent paper, by far the best I've used and recommended by a lot of knife makers. So we're going to start off with the 120. We'll go up to 220. And then we'll see how it looks and probably go up to 400. Okay, this is a time-consuming process. And it's one of those things where you just can't rush. So we're going to rip off a piece, maybe about, what is that, about 2 inches wide, 4 inches long or so. That's all, about the size of my hand. Some guys like to cut it up with scissors in precise little blocks, and it's just easier for me to just rip it off. So what you're going to do is you wrap the sandpaper around the front of the block. And for high carbon steel like 1084, I like to use some WD-40. So spray a little on the blade, a little on the sandpaper, well, at least not really a little. Hold that paper tight against the backing and keep it nice and straight. You don't have to worry about different directions. As a matter of fact, a lot of people recommend going different directions like this. The important part is you keep it flat on the flat of the knife. You can go back and forth. Obviously our finish passes are going to be pulled towards us. But for right now, we just want to get a nice even finish. The 120 grit stage is by far the most important one. And if you screw it up here, you're not going to be able to correct it at the 400 grit, the 200 grit stage, or anything after that. So, by all means, go to town on this step, on the 120 grit. We're just going to keep on going and going. Now, sandpaper versus hardened steel, the sandpaper doesn't last very long at all. So what I do is I take it, go right to that crease, and now I got a fresh piece. Throw a little more WD-40 on there. Hold it nice and tight. Back and forth, back and forth. There is an excellent video out there by a guy named Nick Wheeler on hand sanding. He is one of the best hand sand finishes I've ever seen, and a very, very detailed video. If I could find it, I'll put it in the description down below. But definitely worth a watch. Okay, we'll call that good for the 120. Now you want to inspect it. Take it in all kinds of light. Let me get some paper towels. Give it a nice wipe down. And you just want to look and see that you have a nice uniform finish. I'll probably have to do a little bit more. When in doubt, sand some more. Okay? Also notice I have the clamp back here behind the first hole. That way I know when I put the handle scales on, no matter how far back I put it, the unfinished portion of the tang will be hidden under the handle. You know what, let's do a little bit more with a fresh piece, and then we'll move on to 220. You gotta watch this right in front of the plunge. This choil area tends to be a problem spot. So make sure you get in there. You also want to try to fight the urge to let your dominant hand do all the work. I'm a righty, so naturally my right hand wants to push harder. But as you can see, that's not good. That'll put me right into the bevel, and I don't want scratches in there. Okay, for these last few passes, I'm going to put them all one direction. And like I said, watch that Nick Wheeler video, and he'll explain why it's so important to put them all one direction. You know what? I'm going to go on a diagonal. Well, I guess I'll just explain it. Not to, I want to make sure, you know, Nick Wheeler gets credit for his video, because it was outstanding, and it is kind of how I learned to do it. But I'm putting all the scratches one way. This way, at the next step, at the 220 grit stage, you can clearly see I'll sand another direction. And if there's any discrepancy, any 120 grit scratches still left in it, they'll be staring you in the face. Now, if you scratch this up a little bit, it's no big deal. We're going to finish frying that anyway. Okay? Alright, let's move up to 220. Now that we have a nice foundation. Just going to keep on refining it. Now, obviously I'm not going to make you sit through this whole thing. I'll probably fast forward it so you can see that I actually did it and I didn't cheat and put it on the machine or something. So I don't know that I'm going to do much talking after this. unless there's something important. So I'm going the opposite direction of my previous scratches. At least I think I am. Yes, I am. And this way we'll be able to tell if there's any hidden scratches in there. Now if you want a rough finish, you could stop at the 220 or the 120. It's really up to you what type of finish you're after. 400 is kind of a rougher hand rubbed satin. I kind of consider 400 to be the minimum as far as hand rubbing. For the final passes, let's see, we look pretty good for the final passes. We might have some trouble spots, but for the sake of the video, I'm sure you don't want to watch me do this all day. We're going to do our final passes now. Get a fresh piece. I just moved my sandpaper down, just like that. Get your fresh piece. Some people like to back this with something softer, like a piece of leather, or I've even used a piece of paper towel just to give it a tiny bit of give, and you'll get a cleaner finish. But what you're going to do is get on there. We'll get our WD going. You're going to start all the way back here where they won't see it underneath the tang, and drag it all the way down as straight as possible. Do that a couple of times. Alright, nice and straight. Drag it all the way down. You see I'm moving the block around to try and get a nice fresh piece of abrasive every time. You can go tip to nose too, tip to heel if you prefer that, like this. I like doing it from handle to tip. I guess that's what I was trying to say, handle to tip. Nice smooth pulls are the key here. Well, it's not the best finish ever, because it's a bit of a rush being that it's on video. Let me wipe that down with some clean towels. Zoom out so you can see it. See? You want all those nice lines going one direction. And like I said before, take your time with this. It's not uncommon that you spend half the day doing just this step. Okay? And you see that line where it goes from kind of crappy to really nice? That'll be underneath the tang because it's behind our pin. I'm underneath the tang, underneath the handle rather. Alright, now you just got to flip it over and do the other side. And what I like to do, if you're doing it on a piece of wood or something that might have abrasives in it, take a fresh piece of paper towel, or you could even tape the one side of the blade. I just do this, some paper towel, flip it over, and we go ahead and clamp it back on. Okay? Now it shouldn't move, so it's not going to get scratched up too bad. Alright, so I'm going to finish up this side, and then we'll go to finish grinding. We'll grind the bevels.